Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp. And he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise and stand, each of them, at the entrance of their tents and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of the cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent. The Lord would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of the cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise and bow down, all of them, at the entrance of their tents. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. There's an old house on Coniston Road in Short Hills, New Jersey. It has an architectural feature now obscured by progress. When I was a fourth grader, I'd come to number 25 with my parents for Sunday dinner at grandparents. Walking through the front door, there was a short passage just before you got to the main hall. Turn sharp left and find a walk-in closet for a couple of seasons worth of hats, coats, galoshes, and boots for a family of 5. If you turned right today, you'd find another closet. But if you turned right back then, you found the telephone room. The telephone room. A 5 by 8 more or less room with a couple of small chairs, a narrow shelf, and a large mirror on either side, and a telephone. The telephone. The only telephone in a 3-story house. It was a big deal when it went in, I was told. I remember my grandfather, born in 1890, didn't care for it. He much preferred face-to-face, which is why our Sunday dinners were 2 hours long, or longer. Or it felt that way. Sunday dinner was never interrupted by running for the phone. But in a few short years, we didn't even think about getting up if we didn't want to. We had a machine to answer the phone for us. Initially, I hated getting the machine when I called someone, but then, without really intending to, I found myself at times loving getting the machine because I could leave a message without actually having to deal with the person I was calling. Today we have lots and lots of very smart, well-funded people out there developing machines that will help us stay in touch in ways my grandfather couldn't, and certainly didn't, imagine. This includes a doll that I like to refer to as talking back Barbie. It looks like Barbie, but it requires a Wi-Fi connection. And it'll actually sound like she's conversing with your favorite small person. Phones and talking dolls, this is the visible tip of the digital iceberg. It's all there everywhere in the developing Internet of Things. And we're going to have to watch out for ourselves. That is, watch out for ourselves. What interests and sometimes concerns me is the ways new technologies can render obsolete some older values. When we replace human customer service with computers or texting with talking, the usual justification is that, well, texting's better than nothing. But what happens is almost inevitable. We wind up considering them better than anything, cleaner, less risky, less demanding. If someone asks a tough question in person, where were you last night? It's all but impossible to fake an answer. Over the phone, it's not much easier. People can still detect a hesitation in the voice. But a text, where were you last night, allows time for a considered may be a calculated response, or none at all. Text? What text? The problem is that the sense of community that social media delivers is somewhat illusory because it comes without the hazards and the commitments of a real world community. Our public persona in the Ethernet is or can well be different than what we present face to face, but we like it that way maybe. Actual human beings we know are flawed and forgetful. They're needy and unpredictable in ways that machines are designed not to be. One casualty is empathy. Some people say that we are increasingly adopting new technologies in pursuit of greater control, only to wind up feeling controlled by those technologies. We create those identities we think people will like, which can leave our real selves, warts and all, feeling even more isolated. So there's a whole couple of generations of us who continue to communicate incessantly, but remain apprehensive of face-to-face, and I worry about that. Because I think we're missing out on something fundamental. Conversation, and by this I mean face-to-face conversation, not a series of texts. Conversation presupposes a degree of solitude, because it's in solitude that we learn to think for and even find ourselves. And this sense of who we are is essential for dealing with other people as they are. This has applied from the very beginning. Books of Proverbs and Psalms are loaded with parental advice, telling the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord, for example, instructing them in the way they should go. But this presupposes a deep level of communication in an intergenerational setting. You didn't just email your kid a text or a tract telling them to repent or else. It's always been true. Through the conversational attention of parents, children acquire a sense of connectedness that stays with them. They also develop the practice of, or at least become familiar with, talking about their feelings rather than simply acting on them. One quick anecdote told with permission. When Emily was just short of 3, she was still used to a crib, which occasionally she didn't like. One afternoon, I heard a complaint in the form of a cry. I went upstairs. She was standing up, grabbing the top of the rail, and clearly feeling restrained. I interrupted her crying with her request. Use words, Emily, use words. She stopped, looked straight at me, and said, I want to get out of here. And restraining myself, I picked her up and we went downstairs. Research shows again and again that regular family conversations help children get through these early challenges, from getting out of baby prison to resisting bullying in school. The apocryphal book of Ecclesiasticus, a book of wisdom which sounds very much like Proverbs, says this: a person is known by his appearance, and a sensible person is known when first met face to face. A person's attire and hearty laughter and the way he walks shows what he is. This too is still relevant. When we speak to people in person, we're in a position to recognize the whole package, and that's where empathy begins. Is it any wonder that those who have restricted face-to-face encounters, the sense of empathy doesn't develop as well? The other day I took the bus downtown. I was waiting for it to arrive out here on the corner. And it used to be, not long ago, that the normal clutch of university students would be quietly chatting up their trials and their triumphs. But in recent years, more and more bus stops have fallen silent. Most waiters have their heads down, staring at thin, colorful electronic slabs. They're reading maybe, but often texting or playing online games, and only looking up when they actually have to locate the stairs to get on the bus. How did this get started? Look at the demise of family conversation and find a vicious circle. Look something like this. Parents give their children these devices thinking to please them and to keep up with their neighbors. But then, children can't get their parents' attention away from their devices. So children take refuge in their own devices. Then parents see their children's absorption as permission to spend more time themselves with their devices. And around we go. Well, we say parents shouldn't do that. But this is hard. Parents feel afraid of falling behind their children technologically. Conversation with children takes patience, it takes practice. And it's easier sometimes to demonstrate parental love by taking lots of pictures and posting them. But above all, I can believe that our myriad ubiquitous screens are loved because we think they can somehow insulate us from a horrible risk. This is the risk of boredom, the condition that smartphones have taught us to fear. But we shouldn't, because boredom just happens to be the condition that can grow both patience and imagination. It'd be easy to shift this burden to technology. Technology got us into this mess. Maybe technology can get us out of this mess. Maybe we could design devices to be used more deliberately, like a cell phone that turns off every 30 minutes for 3 minutes, so we could look up and see where the heck we are and what we're doing. It's never going to happen. An idea like that would threaten almost every business model in Silicon Valley, where enormous market forces are predicated on keeping us riveted to our devices. Now, the legendary Steve Jobs reportedly did not allow tablets or smartphones at his dinner table and encouraged his family to talk about books and history. And the artistic visions of Mozart, Kafka, and Picasso were developed, they themselves reported, through recognizing and appropriating the value of constructive silence. Our digital technologies are not politically neutral. The young person who can't or won't be alone, converse with family, go out with friends, attend a lecture, or perform a job without monitoring a cell phone is a walking symptom of our economy's leech-like attachment to our very bodies. This is not good. And I'm not saying that just because this is a place to some extent dedicated to conversation with and among people in the community, but also with and among God. What are these technologies doing to our minds? We know that staring and clicking constantly reduces our ability to concentrate, makes us grow itchy and agitated, and allows us to become fragmented and dispersed people. And for what? For convenience? To save time? To save time for what? Every once in a while, and this bothers the heck out of me, I'll have a couple of minutes and I'll be at my computer in my study at home. I have 27,000 pieces of paper to take care of. And if I know I only have a couple of minutes, I'll call up a game of solitaire. So I'm preaching to myself, okay? Here. Rewired. That's what some people said we've been. We've been rewired. to adapt to the fitful back and forth of the web. And so what happens is we're becoming less fit for the sustained kind of concentration and attention that literature demands. We see fewer young people choosing to study the humanities. And it's another sermon, but consider how much modern art is about style and presentation than it is about substance. Craft, which used to take time, is losing or has lost to concept, to revisioning. I'm not wild about what I see. A poet of the older generation, Rilke, near Maria Rilke, wrote, "All this here and now, so fleeting, seems to require us." Meaning that a part of our psychological and spiritual purpose is to make sense out of things, to bring the world into consciousness, to put it into words, and not just cry about it. We tell stories about ourselves and about our world, and we make it real. We make our memories real. We make ourselves real. And it's only real people who have something to say to each other. I worry that if we were brought up before a judge to answer for our inability to form any clear original thought, it will not be a defense that, well, the internet robbed me when I was paying attention. Now, when we noticed that the pace of our days seemed to be intensifying, we weren't getting as much time with each other as we used to, we sidestepped the whole issue by inventing the concept of quality time. The idea was to schedule time for deep and meaningful conversations. Let's see. Would you like to talk about your career plans? Can we talk about your career plans, say, between 11:30 and 12:15 next Saturday? This is Thanksgiving week. The day being one of the few major holidays not completely overrun by commercially oriented activity. It is, as we used to say, a golden opportunity for quality time, time to connect, parents, kids, and even crazy cousins. But of course, quality time is not so much scheduled as encountered. As a kid, Thanksgiving involved an all-day visit to my mother's parents and siblings. I remember that the conversations would start off sort of transactionally, but then as the day wore on, got better and better and deeper and deeper. So just about the time I was completely running out of energy, my parents were laughing there. They were really laughing. They were having a great time because one story had led to another, which led to another, which led to another. Uncontrollable, unprogrammable. Even if we'd had cell phones, we could not have texted ourselves into that kind of interconnectedness that sustained us until the next happy reunion. There is no real substitute for physical presence. I'd make that a categorical. No substitute for physical presence to pry open the inner recesses of hearts and minds and spirits. Ours, theirs, God's. We can't assume those things will just rise to the occasion whenever we pencil them in. We reach out for help at odd points. We bloom in odd seasons. The surest way to see the brightest colors, or the darkest ones for that matter, is to be watching and waiting for them. The implications are fairly straightforward. If some of the most important things in our lives, the deepening of interpersonal intimacy among them, can't be put on a calendar, they can't be scheduled in between a staff meeting and a dentist appointment, and they can't be reduced to a 140-character tweet, we're going to have to make ourselves more generally available. Informal interactions arising out of physical presence, those are the times that can enrich us, sometimes by surprise. I entered with the telephone room, let me leave it, by saying that in this narrow room, you remember, both sides were mirrors. Both sides were mirrors. If you turn sideways, you get this really weird tunnel effect where you can see reflection of reflection of reflection of reflection of yourself going and coming deep to and from the shadows. I don't want to see myself in dozens of copies fading into the shadows. I want to see my family. I want to see them and my friends up front, personal, face to face. I want to experience the love and community that friends and family can provide. And they can provide it here. They can provide it in a dozen different places, hundreds of places this Thanksgiving. I'm grateful we have this day on the calendar. And I include on the list of things to be grateful for the fact that true love begins, as we are reminded, in face-to-face encounters. May it be so for all of us this happy weekend. And thank God, from whom all blessings flow.